For centuries, the Roman army relied on an organized but chaotic system of supplying itself. On one hand were the military fabricae, or workshops, located within every Roman fort, tasked with quickly manufacturing or repairing equipment right at the source. But unable to keep up with the army's high demand and equipment variety, private civilian contractors and businesses within key cities were also employed to manufacture, transport, and administer the army's material needs. This rather effective two-pronged system, which was only loosely overseen by the state, was used to equip Rome's professional army during the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries AD, a period known as the Principate. For a closer look at this supply system, check out our previous video on the workshops of war. In this video, however, we will be looking at the evolution of this system during the late Roman Empire, which saw a greater level of control, standardization, and even efficiency, quite literally becoming factories, capable of quickly equipping new armies to replace any that were defeated in the field. They would allow Rome to survive for almost 200 more years of violent civil wars, invasions, and defeats, arming every soldier in the best gear for the time. As the strategic position of the Roman Empire started to shift across the turbulent 3rd century, so too did many aspects of its army. Legion sizes were greatly reduced from 5,000 to about 1,000 men each. Even the equipment of a Roman soldier started to change from one that a modern audience would readily recognize. Apart from various new spear and sword variations needed for the latest trends of warfare, the late Roman army saw a growing demand for specialized weapons. Libanius, for instance, describes Roman infantry using clubs to counter Persian cataphracts at the Battle of Singara in 343, while Ammianus mentions battle axes being used to penetrate Gothic armor at Adrianople in 378. The army also started employing a wider variety of javelins, like the spicula, lancea, iacula, and plumbata, among several others. For more long-range weapons, they now more commonly employed composite bows, staff slings, and possibly an early variation of a crossbow. But alongside this need for a more diverse and specialized arsenal, the Roman army was hit by a decrease in manufacturing productivity. In the 3rd century, the empire was ravaged from within by constant civil wars and internal power struggles, which were usually exploited by foreign invaders. Some of these managed to penetrate deep into Roman territory, like when the Persians briefly captured Antioch in 260, or when the Heruli sacked Athens in 267. We can only imagine how such instability would have disrupted the traditional lines of supply and manufacture for the army. Adding to this was a decrease in the productivity of military workshops, as the legions were broken up into much smaller components, and many auxiliary units were relocated or destroyed. The army on the frontiers of the Rhine, Danube, and Euphrates rivers had no doubt felt a decrease in self-reliance in manufacture. Furthermore, large sections of the army were now grouped into highly mobile field armies, which were now constantly on the move, dealing with never-ending threats without permanent bases. And temporary field forges are not efficient at crafting weapons and armor. A combination of all these factors necessitated a change in the administration of military equipment and encouraged the Roman state to now take on a more direct role in its procurement. But what solution could possibly fix this? How should one reform the logistics of the army's weapons and armor, given it was never changed for centuries? As you and I would agree, ancient civilizations are fascinating to study. But we often focus on the few bigger aspects and gloss over the equally fascinating smaller ones. But to truly understand a civilization, you need it all. And today's sponsor, Hungry Minds, does just that. Their book, or should I say the book, An Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, is a 400-page, beautifully illustrated collection of countless inventions that have led to our modern civilization today. Apart from many modern concepts, they also cover ancient and medieval ones, like farming, mining, glassmaking, and more, making it a true modern artifact and a beautiful gift for yourself or a loved one. It's no wonder they raised over $2 million on Kickstarter and became an instant bestseller. This book is a great way to fill in any knowledge gaps that you or your children might have about human innovations and our collective progress across centuries that have shaped our world today. On top of that, it's a very aesthetic book that will look great in any bookshelf, and I'm very glad to have it in mine. Hungry Minds has offered all my viewers, including you, a 10% discount on their book with our code HistoriaMilitum10. Click the link in the description to get it today. It would be under the Tetrarchy that the first series of new state-run factories would spring up across the empire. This innovation is specifically credited to Emperor Diocletian, following his rise to power in 284 AD. But many don't know that they were already a growing trend. Because the military workshops were facing difficulties for quite some time, the army had to rely more and more on civilian craftsmen, typically individuals or small groups, but even they were vulnerable to the forces at play. Even if they managed to escape the effects of military unrest, they would definitely feel the impact of the collapsing coinage, which devalued all money and made it harder to afford raw materials or make a living. So in order to maintain its craftsmen, the government integrated them into the Annonai, the imperial supply networks, even decades before Diocletian, and provided them with all the food, pay, and raw materials they needed in return for military equipment. Diocletian's main contribution then was just formalizing this agreement by incorporating these workers into the state administration and concentrating them in large centralized facilities. Though still called fabricae, these facilities would now be under much tighter state supervision, with improved accounting and quality control, marking a shift towards greater centralization and planning in the Roman military's logistics. Our main source for these new state-run arms factories is the Notitia Dignitatum, an official late Roman document that lists all of the Western and Eastern Empire's military units, and fabricae, along with the specific goods they produced. In total, the Notitia Dignitatum lists 35 fabricae in the empire, with 20 located in the western half and 15 in the eastern one. They also seem to specialize in crafting different gear. The most common designation was scutaria, or shields, assigned to 17 factories located across the empire, with every frontier province having at least one. By this period, all shields would be either circular or oval in shape, implying a shift in battle tactics. Of the 17 shield factories, 7 were additionally designated armorum, or arms, suggesting they produced weapons and armor in addition to shields. Interestingly, 6 out of 7 of these were in the Eastern Empire, with only 1 being in the West. But to balance this, the Western Empire had 3 other armorum sites, but of which only 1 made shields, in addition to saddles. The West also housed all the factories labeled spatharia for making swords and loricaria for making body armor. This would suggest that, for whatever reason, weapons and armor in the East were often made together in the same facility, while in the West they were typically produced separately. A rather interesting fact that I can't explain. The most commonly produced and worn armor in the late Empire seems to have been mail, which by now sometimes covered far more parts of the body, as depicted on some frescoes at Dura Europos. Scale cuirasses were also widely used alongside, sometimes just as commonly. While the famous banded iron armor, termed lorica segmentata by more recent scholars, however, had seemingly fallen out of use by the 4th century. perhaps due to the logistical burden of maintaining it, an issue that would have been exacerbated by the gradual dissolution of the army's traditional logistical network in the 3rd century. The best known equipment for this period are helmets, which underwent a rapid and significant design evolution, likely made possible by the increased centralization of production. One such helmet was the Spangenhelm, which consisted of a multi-piece segmented bowl, some of which were decorated. While not of the same quality as helmets from the Principate era, it was much cheaper and faster to produce, and was still fairly reliable, having a better quality-to-effort ratio. Another type was the ridge helm, which had several variations, and gained its name from the central metal band to which parts of the bowl were riveted, which was also more economical than crafting an intact bowl. It is believed this type originated from Persian designs, and the most common type was the one found at modern-day Intersiza in Hungary. But not all late Roman helmets were cheap. In the small village of Berkasovo in Serbia, 2 spectacular ridge helmets were found alongside horse armor, suggesting they were used by cavalry officers. Being fully gilded in a layer of silver and then gold, and decorated with glass inlays and semi-precious stones, these 2 helmets represent the other extreme of quality and expense, and help us imagine the vast range in customization that can be applied to military gear, depending on a soldier's rank and prestige. One of them was still made of 2 pieces, while the other was made of 4, and both of them stand as living proof that the late Roman army still had it. The contemporary writer Vegetius famously blamed the late Roman army for neglecting the use of armor in both quality and quantity, supposedly in stark contrast to the glory days of the Principate, a belief that has persisted to this day, but is demonstrably false. The rest of the fabricae were designated for crafting specialized equipment, but were very irregularly located, especially considering that both halves of the empire used the same equipment. All factories producing bows and arrows, named Arcuaria and Sagittaria respectively, were confined in the Western Empire. Also in the West was the only factory, and a portion of a second, which produced artillery, termed ballistaria, as well as the only one designated scordiscorum, producing saddles. Meanwhile, the Eastern Empire had the sole factory designated hastaria, producing spears, and one named armamentaria seemed to be a fortified warehouse for storing gear before launching Eastern campaigns. The final factory designation was klibanaria, which produced specialized weapons and heavy armor for cataphracts, or klibanari, elite cavalry units whose riders and steeds were fully covered in a mix of mail, scale, and segmented plate armor. There were 3 of these factories in the east, and only part of one in the west. At first glance, this distribution makes no sense. A single spear factory seems absurdly insufficient for the east, let alone the entire empire. And archery had always been strongly associated with the East, where it had a longer tradition of use, yet not a single archery factory was located there. So what exactly is going on here? The most popular theory is that the factories designated armorum produced both weapons and armor, as stated before, and were able to close the gap in the asymmetry of sword, spear, and armor production. Additionally, we know of 4 fabricae without any designations, which were likely just as flexible. As for archery, its prominence in the East actually explains the absence of bow factories there, as there are references to bows being paid as taxes in kind. This reveals a crucial point, that despite the rise of large state factories, civilian production was still relied upon, just far less than during the Principate. These private workshops likely filled many of the gaps, supplying spears in the west and saddles and artillery in the east, explaining why official factories for those items were absent in those regions. Thus, all military gear would be evenly available across the empire, and whenever it was not, this was due to differences in the strategy and combat styles of the regions. For example, the uneven distribution of Klibanaria is actually quite proportional to the number of units stationed nearby. Since the combat trend in the east placed a greater importance on heavy cavalry to counter similar troops used by local enemies like the Persians, the east fielded 14 units of cataphracts, while the west only had 4. The centralization of military production went even further. Several military complexes housed weaving mills that produced long-sleeved tunics and trousers, which would be dyed and issued to soldiers along with broad belts and boots. The first late Roman factories would have been set up within compounds in strategic cities of the 4 tetrarchs, like Antioch, Nicomedia, Thessalonica, and Augustodunum. These major urban centers were an attractive choice for many reasons. They provided protection, housing, and services for the factory's workforce, and were strategically located near major roads, allowing them to use well-established networks and facilities to supply nearby soldiers. In a similar logic, most of the other factories were also founded within major urban centers, likely prioritizing those with long-established traditions of producing military gear in the past. But geographic positioning was also evident. The factories in Italy, for example, were mostly located in the Po Valley, to supply the many units in northern Italy as well as those beyond the Alps. But not all factories were located in urban centers or far from the frontiers. It's likely that for regions that had little to no urban civilian industries before, fabricae were placed next to legionary forts, where military workshops would have already been present. The factories of Illyricum are a great example of this. 3 out of 5 of them were placed along the frontier, in the fortresses of Aquincum, Carnuntum, and Lauriacum, which were home to former legionary workshops for centuries, and likely the largest industrial centers in the area. The other 2 were at Salona and Sirmium, the most important cities in the region, and all of them together had access to safe and reliable transportation and communication via roads or rivers, ensuring the military in the region could be effectively and consistently supplied. The availability of raw resources was doubtless another major consideration, and the factories at Argentomagus and Sardis, for example, were located next to iron deposits and had a long history of metalworking, which made them obvious choices. An extract from the Theodosian Code written in 438 AD explains the reasoning behind these workshops. The harsh necessity of war has invented the Guild of Fabricenses, which guards the decrees of the emperors with a kind of immortality. For this guild arms, this guild equips our army. Hence provision has been made that such persons shall be subservient to their own skills, and when they have been exhausted by their labors, they, together with their offspring, shall die in the profession to which they were born. If this sounds a lot like medieval serfdom, you are right. Diocletian is often credited with laying its foundation by tying families to a single profession or plot of land. Accordingly, service in the new fabricae became a hereditary obligation, passed from father to son to guarantee a stable workforce that would not switch jobs if the situation worsened. Furthermore, this work was classified as a type of military service. In some cases, these workers were even called to take up arms, as in 376 AD at Adrianople. There, armed fabrica workers, along with local levies, tried and failed to suppress a group of Goths on the orders of the local magistrate. Each factory likely had several hundreds of workers, and was organized like a military unit, commanded by a praepositus and other ranks borrowed from the army. The Romans would keep careful records of every worker because they enjoyed a remarkably high status, likely second only to the Scholae Palace Guards, which tells us a lot about their importance to the empire. Now let's take a look at the administration of these new factories, which was surprisingly complex and bureaucratic. Small-scale needs could be handled by the forts themselves, but let's imagine that a unit on the Danube needed a large shipment of swords and artillery. Its commander would need to send a detailed request up the command chain. First to the local dukes, the provincial commander of all units in the area, then to the Western Magister Militum, the master of soldiers based in the capital of Mediolanum. From him, the request was sent to the more senior Magister Officiorum, the master of all offices and administration in the Western Empire, who also resided in the capital. He would act as a bridge between the military and civilian administration, and would delegate this task to his department of the Scrinium Fabricarum, which would contact the right factories to either craft or withdraw the goods from stock. The final task of transporting the goods back to the unit was then forwarded to another branch of the civilian administration, the Praetorian Prefects. The late empire usually had 4 of them, each administering a large region of the empire, which included the supply of raw resources to the factories, secured as taxes in kind from local city councils. Because the only sword and artillery factories in the west were located in Gaul, the request reached the Praetorian Prefect of Gaul, headquartered in Augusta Treverorum, who would then delegate it to his department of the Scrinium Armorum. Among their responsibilities was arranging transportation and procuring goods not made in factories, like bows and arrows in the Eastern Empire. To move the equipment, the department would contact nearby provincial governors to provide civilian ships and wagons. The Praetorian Prefect himself would impose heavy inspection and quality control throughout transport, as the Master of Offices would hold him accountable for any missing goods. While this process seems inefficient, it was designed for strict accountability and security. By centralizing production and requiring high-level approval, the emperors prevented weapons from falling into the hands of brigands, rebels, or barbarians. Furthermore, since most factories were highly specialized, often crafting only 1 or 2 pieces of equipment, a greater administrative structure was needed to coordinate them, as you saw in my example. But the system wasn't rigid for everyone. It is believed the higher status field armies were given warrants to procure any gear they needed from any cities or factories they passed by, since the empire's entire security rested on their continual readiness for combat. In comparison, the old Roman system of logistics might have proven effective at fueling the empire's war machine during the Principate, but it did not prove to be sufficiently flexible to survive the chaos of the 3rd century. And although we sometimes like to fit the narrative of a long decaying empire that slowly worsened in every aspect, in my opinion, its military logistics in the 4th century was definitely at an all-time high. This new system would supply hundreds of thousands of troops with good quality clothing, weapons, and armor, even when the empire's resources were often strained. It was only at a slow and gradual level through repeated infighting that this necessary infrastructure to maintain the army, and the political will to upkeep it, slowly eroded, and even then only in the west, with the late Roman army surviving in the Eastern Empire to carry the Roman name and martial legacy long into the future. If you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely enjoy the one about weapon production in the Principate. That period has far more surviving sources in archaeology to draw from, so we had a lot to work with. Otherwise, check out the other related videos on our channel. I hope to see you in the next one.